just thank you for bringing the body of Christ into this space. I'm so grateful for each of you taking the time to be here today, and especially if you're a guest here among us. I'm so grateful for you being a part of our journey. And so also I wanted to take a moment to introduce some of our guests here. If you just mind saying just who you are, I'm going to point to you, and I'm looking at that gentleman back there.
Good morning. I'm Chris Leslie, friend of Jason.
We're a friend. We're friends. And who are you?
I work with Habitat for Humanity.
Executive Director, Man Changing Alamance County.
You're going to make me go after him?
Yeah, I know.
I'm Katie Burkholder. I'm a local realtor with RE/MAX, and I'm currently on the City Council.
Thank you for being here, Katie.
Hey y'all, I'm Kristen Powers, and she, her pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Benevolence Farm.
Thank you for being here. I've walked with a question this week of wondering where you feel God's presence the most, where you feel like, and maybe if it's not God, where do you feel connected to the universe and to the world? Where is that space for you? For me, it's on my walks and runs is when I feel the most connected. And this week on one of my runs, not marathons. I don't want anybody to get anything like. I felt in planting a church, God reminding me that the call to me is to form a community that is together, and that God will orchestrate the rest. Jason, you just invite people to the table and let me do the work. Thanks, God, but no thanks. Part of me, to be completely honest, fights tooth and nail against this. And maybe in somewhat of whatever profession you are at, you might do the same. I spend a great deal of my time trying to get into God's lane, to do God's bidding, trying to attend to the long daily tasks at hand. Who didn't I text today? Who do I need to text? Whose email didn't I return? Constantly checking my email. Maybe somebody replied to an email. Maybe I can return that email. And thinking, if I don't return that email, then I'm failing at what God has called me to do. And I end up in this endless cycle of always checking. I've felt a sense of heaviness in this journey to start a church, and that's. And I think that heaviness is a orchestration on my part to do what we all kind of do, is control. I want to control it. I ask myself often what I need to do to make this holy work of cultivating a community work, while forgetting that this holy work is not mine, it is God's, and I just get, like you, to be a part of it. So I went back to some of my writing in 2019, 4 years ago, to see what my hopes and visions and dreams for this community would be. And we all probably have hopes and dreams of what we hope this community would be. And I wrote these words: authentic relationships and belonging define our journey. For me, it wasn't a sermon or a church event that changed my life. It was an authentic, caring relationship. I've never been changed by church. I've never been changed by a worship experience. I think those moments, they form my work, but they have not been transformative in the way that a relationship with somebody is. To put it simply, God does God's transformative work through relationships. I don't have to tell you that, as we have read, that loneliness in our individualistic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps culture is an epidemic. Suicide rates are increasing among all ages. People feel more and more isolated in our so-called connected world. And the pandemic has taught us many things. Among them is that we need to be in community with one another. As I hold this truth, I think about Genesis. And in some ways, this is a very patriarchal text. But I want to Genesis in the 20th century has been co-opted as a historical, factual book instead of a religious, mythical narrative that cultivates an identity of a particular group of people. During the time that Genesis was being put together, as the world was changing fast. And there was, during that time, different cultures were writing stories and narratives about who they were, how they came to be, how they were created. One of these is a Babylonian mythical narrative called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And if you can go read the Epic of Gilgamesh, you'll be surprised to learn that there's a lot of similarities in the book of Genesis and the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I imagine this group of people thought, it's like an iPhone kind of deal. Like, they got one. Like, we need one. Like, what's our story? Like, who are we? What is our identity? Who is God? And so they set off to write a book. I think a community set off to write a book about who is God and who are we. And I wonder if we could totally extrapolate all our biblical all the things we know and the idioms that we all know about the Bible and anything that we even know about Christianity and culture, if we could just extrapolate that and to say, wow, this is a book I've never read. And I opened the pages to the first part of this book and I began reading it. I'm going to be captivated by a line that this community wrote that has walked with me and stirred me this week. And it's this, is that God creates a human, Adam, and He gives Adam everything. Work to be proud of, a garden to till. This is a dream job. And then God says these words, it is not good for the human to be alone. I think about in our culture where loneliness is an epidemic, and yet here's this book at the beginning saying, we as a people are not meant to live life in isolation. This is who we are. Nobody should be alone. And then God in the word for good, which is you'll find in chapter 1 and chapter 2 and all throughout the Pentateuch, is tov. And what God calls good, and if you go back and look, is anything that God sees as good is that which brings about life. And anything that does not bring about life is not tov. So if you're understanding, if you know Jesus' image, when Jesus says like the tree doesn't produce fruit, He says something kind of mean, like cut it down. It's because it's not tov. If you don't produce fruit, you get cut down. Because it's not tov. And it's a celebration of life. And so when God sees this human, Adam, by himself, He says, this is not good. This is not tov. And so what God says is, I am going to create a suitable helper to complement this human. And first the attempt which I think was a good attempt by God, actually. Most of y'all might, God's like, I'll give you some animals. For most of y'all, it will be like, yeah, that's good enough. I don't need another one of these. This is fine. Adam, but he looks at Adam and is like, okay, I've created animals, and still, Adam is missing something, and so God creates a suitable helper to complement this human being. And when it says suitable and complementing somebody that is different, he doesn't create a clone. Most of us try to create clones in our life, right? Let's just be honest. We want people that look like us, talk like us, sound like us, agree with us. Yes, yes, yes. And then you realize it's a little frustrating. In my household, here I go. Kia's like, what is he going to say? I'll just say this about how we complement each other. I open cabinets, she closes them. I think there is something beautiful about these early texts that say something about humanity. Is that what is Tov is when we live life in community that complements us. When we live life in diversity among us. And last week was Pentecost. And I want you to think of this image that we receive on Pentecost. The people are all together. Begins, and it says it 2 or 3 times. It is the antithetical to what Adam was. It is people, men, women, I imagine children, gathered in a room. And what happens when they are together? Community, and the Spirit pours out among them. As I was running today, I felt like this just clarity of mind as God says, if you'll just be together, I'll do the rest. If you just do that work of holy community and living amongst one another, listening to one another, affirming one another, seeking to trust one another, and then God will just pour out among us. Because that is what God calls Tov. A lot of times our question about a church is this: can I accept their theology? Can I accept their worship practices? Can I accept their strategy, their values? But the real question is can I love these people? That's the question you should receive when you go to a new church, or can I live in community with these people? Because if you can live in community with these people, the Spirit pours out. And maybe you came to this community because you're tired of being alone. You're tired of being alone. You're tired of not being seen. You're tired of not being affirmed. And so you took a courageous act to lean in to this community. I want to encourage us as we reflect and celebrate 4 years as a community, and as we look forward to the next 4 years, is to capture what it means to be in community, but to never assume that the person across the room is the person that God has been leading you to that might change your life. I talk about being a pastor of 2 rural churches before I started planning Storied Church. And I was in a 2-point charge in Caswell County. And when you are a person, you probably even in Alamance County, I'm from Florida, if there is a big, I should just get a shirt. I'm not from here. Go ahead and say it. And there's this one guy, Roger, I just received that, when I met him. He looked at me and then looked at the ground. I became friends with his wife, and we would go to lunch together with Roger, and Roger would just look at the table, like wouldn't look at me, wouldn't engage in conversation. I'm just like, this guy hates me. Like, why doesn't he like me? I want him to like me. Roger was born and raised in Caswell County, living in the house that his wife was born in. Like, I was an outsider. And then one day, Roger, he mowed the grass at the church. He came in to my office with a pack of nabs and a Diet Coke. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, he's going to dress me down. He's gonna give me something that he's been wanting to tell me. And I was scared, like, what is he going to say? Tell me everything I'm doing wrong. Remind me I'm not from here. But it was the opposite. Week after week, you'd bring a pack of nabs and a Diet Coke. And what happened in that space of time was transformative to my life. It changed me because Roger became my friend. Roger welcomed me into this Floridian, into his life. When I met Roger, it was like this, and now when I see Roger, it's like he takes my hand and he pulls me in. The nabs, the pack of nabs and the Coke became our sacrament. And Roger has changed my life. I'm reminded yet again by God that our holy mission as a community is to create space where people feel a little less lonely in this world. Where they feel like they belong, where they feel like they are seen. One of those people that was around a table around 3.5 years ago is right here. Who shared part of herself and leaning in, courageous, and I'm so grateful for Shelley, and I invited Shelley to share a little part of her story today.
When we first talked about that I was going to say something, the comment was made about, write it down, send it in, let's look over it. I'm more organic than that because I want it to be true and authentic. And what Jason was talking about in walking with the Lord and how your day-to-day transactional activities can impact where you end up if you start on Monday and by the time you get to Sunday, and how the things of the week can kind of change you. Things every day can kind of change you. The interactions you have with people can change you. In 2018, I married my wife, and we were both members at First Baptist across the street. When you get to a place where you're not walking harmoniously, and you know you need to do something different. When the Lord, you don't hear His voice. Not that He's not speaking to you, but you don't hear His voice. And Gaddy and I had a really good conversation back then about, maybe there's something different. Maybe there's some way that we can serve the Lord differently. And he introduced me to Storied Church and to Jason. At that same time, my father was diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. And thank you, now we have a pandemic. And thank you, my job of 23 years at Duke, I got caught up in a reduction in force. So there was a lot of stuff happening all at one time. And I had a pig picking in my backyard for my dad. We had a barbecue. And I invited Jason and his lovely family to come over. And Jason didn't know my father, had never met him. My father was an atheist. And Jason took a moment to talk to him. And that to me was community. That was giving. That was giving of himself to this total stranger who, whether he knew it or not, wasn't going to listen to what he had to say. That my dad was stubborn. He was a crazy old man. And so then we have a pandemic. And I took some time off from work. And I was angry. I was so angry at Dad because nothing that I could say would get through to him. And he would tell me if I'm good enough, or if I've been good enough, and if there's a God, then I'll see him. And it took me having to walk away from this environment, having to walk away from people, having to be alone, and having to go through that grief and that anger to realize God finally said to me, Shelley, it's not up to you. You did your part. You gave. You shared. You did your job. You need to step away and let me take control. Don't worry about it. Don't worry. My relationship with your father is different than my relationship with you. And we all have different relationships. And we all have different communities. But the thing that I have found most inspiring is when I look around this room and I see so many different people from different backgrounds and from different walks of life and from different careers and different socioeconomic and different races and different genders and different identities. And that's okay. That's okay. Because God called us all to be together and to serve and to give and to have community. And the song that we sang, God gives and God takes away. And I'm okay with that. God took my dad. And that's okay. If I see him again, I will rejoice. And if I don't, that was his decision. We all have a decision. We're all given this free gift that we can't work for, we can't be good enough for. It's just simply this free gift that God gives us. And it's up to us to accept that. It's like going to a birthday party and here's your present. You can take it or not. That's your decision. But this community that has welcomed me and that has loved me regardless of myself, regardless of the decisions I make or the things I do, it's like having a really good friend that you don't see for a long time, and then you go back and you just pick right up where you left off. And it's okay. It's like time, it passed, but we're still here. And so my hope and my prayer for this group of people is that we do share, that we do what Jesus called us to do in sharing the gospel and reaching others and serving others. I enjoy the fruit of my labor. I enjoy cleaning my house. Some people love it, some people don't. I like to sit back at the end of the evening and say, wow, this looks good. I did a good job. And I try to teach my children that. I succeeded in 1 out of 3. That's not too bad, 1 out of 3. So what I want to leave everybody with is, you might not always agree with what this guy's got to say.
Wait a minute, what?
Because church is more than just the pastor. Church is the group. It's the community. It's all of us coming together and accepting one another right where we are, just like we are, and bringing you out of that loneliness and out of that grief, and not saying, hey, I've missed you, where you been? Welcome. Glad to see you. Thanks for coming. So it's bringing us all together where we are, in our life, where we are, in our journey with Christ, where we are in any kind of relationship. But yeah, it's having a relationship with somebody you just met and the new friends you make. Because you know they got your back at the end of the day. You know they'll be there for you. And that's the sense of community that I have longed for and searched for, and that I hope everybody else, and I pray everybody else will find that as well. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Shelley.